The unexpected rescue. John had been on countless missions in his career as a soldier, but nothing could prepare him for what he found on this distant planet. It was supposed to be a simple recon mission, a check on a long-forgotten world that no one had visited in years. But as he landed his ship in the middle of a desolate valley, everything went wrong. The air was thick with tension, and the ground seemed to hum with a strange energy. His sensors had picked up unusual readings, but he had brushed them off as mere glitches. Little did he know, this planet was far from empty. It was hiding secrets, dangerous ones. John made his way through the rocky terrain, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The sky was an unusual shade of purple, casting a haunting glow over the land. As he walked deeper into the valley, he saw something that stopped him dead in his tracks. Movement. It was a figure, small and fragile, bound by chains to a stone pillar. John instinctively reached for his weapon, his heart racing. The figure was unlike any human he had seen before. It was an alien girl, with pale green skin and hair that shimmered like silver in the dim light. Her eyes, large and wide, looked up at him with a mix of fear and desperation. She was struggling to free herself, but the chains held her tightly in place. Without thinking, John sprinted toward her. The moment he got closer, he could hear her soft cries, each one full of pain and helplessness. The sight of her, trapped and in pain, ignited something deep inside him, a need to protect. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you," John said in a calm voice, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. He knew this could be a trap, that she might be bait to lure him into danger, but something about her told him that she was no threat. The girl's eyes widened as she looked up at him. She tried to speak, but the words were foreign to him, a language he couldn't understand. She seemed to be saying something, but the words were lost in the wind. Still, John could see the desperation in her eyes. He had to help her. John quickly assessed the situation. The chains were thick and ancient-looking, not like anything he had seen in his time. They had a strange metallic glow to them, which made him think they were more than just simple restraints. Whoever had captured her didn't want her to escape. He knelt beside her and gently placed a hand on her arm. She flinched at the touch but didn't pull away. John took out his knife and began to work on the chains. His hands shook slightly, both from the tension of the moment and from the girl's intense gaze. Every second felt like an eternity. As he cut through the chains, the girl looked around nervously, as if she was waiting for something to happen. John didn't know what she was thinking, but he could tell she was afraid. Afraid of something worse than the chains. The final chain snapped, and the girl fell to the ground, her legs trembling beneath her. She looked up at John with gratitude, but still, she didn't speak. Instead, she reached out with a shaking hand and touched his chest, as if trying to communicate something. John helped her to her feet, but as soon as she stood, something strange happened. The air around them seemed to shift. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, as if the planet itself was reacting to the girl's freedom. A strange, deep hum filled the air, and John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Before he could process what was happening, a low growl echoed from the distance. The sound sent a chill through John. He looked over his shoulder, and his instincts screamed at him to move. "Get down," he shouted, grabbing the girl by the arm and pulling her behind a large rock. She didn't resist, but her eyes were wide with fear, understanding that something was coming for them. John crouched low, trying to keep both himself and the girl hidden. From the shadows, a group of alien figures emerged, their silhouettes casting long, menacing shapes in the fading light. They were the same creatures who had captured the girl. Their eyes glowed a fierce red, and their weapons were unlike anything John had ever seen. The group of aliens moved in a slow, deliberate manner, their gaze scanning the area. John's heart raced. He couldn't let them take her again. But he wasn't a soldier trained to fight an entire army. He was just one man, against a group of advanced aliens. He had no choice. The girl had been his responsibility the moment he decided to save her, and now he had to protect her, no matter what. But as the aliens drew closer, John felt something change. The air around him felt charged with an energy he couldn't explain. It was as if the girl's presence was causing something to stir inside him, something he couldn't understand. He glanced at her, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. She seemed to recognize something in him, something that made her reach out to him with a silent plea. She didn't speak, but her eyes told him everything. John knew what he had to do. He couldn't let these aliens take her back. He stood up, gripping his weapon tightly. The girl stood beside him, her eyes watching him with a strange, knowing expression. In that instant, John realized that saving her had set something in motion, something bigger than he could have imagined. And the danger was just beginning. The alien's secret. John had barely finished catching his breath when the girl's strange, glowing eyes locked onto his. The aliens were closing in fast, but she didn't seem to fear them. She was focused on something else, something that had nothing to do with the immediate threat. With her chains gone, she stood a little straighter, her once trembling form now standing firm beside him. But instead of trying to run, she placed her hand on his arm, an action that seemed almost deliberate, as if she wanted to show him something. And then, without warning, her eyes flashed, the eerie glow in them flickering like a light struggling to stay on. "Why are you looking at me like that?" John muttered, his voice low. His instincts told him she wasn't just a helpless prisoner anymore. She was different, more powerful, more dangerous. She didn't answer him, but her gaze was intense. It was as though she was trying to communicate without words. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an energy John couldn't explain. The world felt strangely still, as if everything was waiting for something. The girl turned, her eyes scanning the distance, and for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, though John didn't understand the words. It sounded like a language older than anything he had ever heard, a melody mixed with power and wisdom. The way she spoke, with such calmness, made John feel that the words she uttered were far more than just sounds. They were a warning. Then it happened. Without a single gesture, the ground beneath them trembled. The wind picked up, whipping around like a storm had suddenly appeared from nowhere. John glanced at the girl, his heart pounding as he realized something was changing in the very air. The girl looked at him, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes, and suddenly, the strange humming sound from earlier grew louder. It wasn't the wind, it was something much deeper, something that seemed to come from within the planet itself. "What are you doing?" John whispered, taking a cautious step back. The girl didn't answer, but she closed her eyes. For a brief second, everything seemed to go still. Time itself felt like it had paused, frozen in that one moment. The trembling of the earth stopped, and the distant aliens froze, mid-step, as if caught in the very air around them. John's heart skipped a beat. He was standing in the middle of something impossible. Then the girl opened her eyes again, and the time around them snapped back to normal. The wind rushed forward, but this time, the aliens were no longer moving toward them. They were stuck, unable to advance, their bodies locked in place. It was as if time had briefly been frozen for them, and now they were struggling to regain control. John stared at her, his mind racing. What had just happened? He had seen advanced technology before, but nothing like this. Nothing that could stop time. But that's exactly what had happened. He couldn't explain it, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. The girl turned to face him, her expression unreadable. She seemed to be waiting for something from him, something like recognition. But John was still too stunned to speak. You stopped them. You stopped time," he said, the words barely escaping his lips. Her eyes softened for a moment, but then the intensity returned. She reached out again, touching his chest as if confirming something. This time, John felt a strange warmth spread from the point of contact, a warmth that was both reassuring and unsettling. "I'm not just anyone," she said, though her words were not in a language John could understand. But somehow he knew what she meant. He could feel it in his bones, a connection that was as strong as it was confusing. The air around them shifted again, and this time, John could see it more clearly. There were glowing symbols appearing in the air, shimmering like ancient constellations, just beyond his reach. The girl's power was unmistakable. But why was she so far from her own people? And why had she been captured in the first place? Before John could voice his questions, the aliens snapped out of their frozen state. The leader of the group, a tall and imposing figure, let out a furious roar. The others immediately raised their weapons, but instead of attacking, they seemed to hesitate. It was as if they, too, were trying to understand what had just occurred. The girl's gaze never wavered, and John instinctively raised his weapon, ready to fight. But the girl placed a hand on his arm once more, her touch gentle but firm. Her eyes were calm, but there was something else in them, something almost pleading. "I know you're afraid," she said softly, but this time, John could understand her words. It wasn't just a strange language. It was as though her voice had somehow translated directly into his mind. "I'm not afraid," John replied, his voice steady. "But who are you? What is happening?" The girl gave him a small, sad smile. "I am the last of my kind. My people once controlled time itself. And now, they are gone. The ones who took me want my power. They want to use me to rule." John's heart sank. He had no idea what kind of enemies they were up against, but it was clear now that this was no ordinary rescue mission. The girl wasn't just a prisoner. She was a weapon, a force unlike anything he could have ever imagined. "But why me?" John asked, looking at her with a mix of confusion and awe. "Because you saved me," she said simply. "And in doing so, you've become part of my story." As the tension mounted, and the aliens prepared to strike, John realized he wasn't just in the middle of a battle. He had been swept into something far larger, something that would change the course of his life forever. The girl's eyes flashed again, and John felt that same strange energy surge through him. The battle had only just begun, and what came next would surprise him in ways he could never predict. The pursuit begins. John didn't have time to process everything the girl had revealed. The alien forces were regrouping, their eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger, and there was no more time for questions. The girl's power was immense, but so were the forces against them. The battle was about to begin, and it would be unlike anything John had ever faced. Without a word, John grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her behind a rocky outcrop for cover. His heart was racing, but his mind was focused on one thing: survival. He had no idea how he was going to get out of this, but he knew he couldn't let her fall into the hands of these aliens. "What now?" John whispered, though he already knew the answer. There was no now. It was just fight and escape, and hope they lived long enough to figure it out. The girl didn't speak, but her eyes told him everything. She was ready. She was always ready. It was as if she knew what was coming next, as if she had been preparing for this moment her whole life. Her expression was calm, unnervingly so, even as the sounds of the approaching alien soldiers grew louder. John looked at her, his brow furrowed. "You really are different, aren't you?" For a brief moment, she met his gaze. Then she raised her hand and pointed to the distance. John followed the direction of her finger, but there was nothing there, nothing except the endless purple horizon. That's when he heard it, a low hum, deep and resonating, like a warning. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. It wasn't the same as before, when the girl had briefly stopped time. This was something else, something worse. John's pulse quickened. He didn't have to look to know the alien ships were coming. He could feel them, the weight of their presence pressing down on him. The girl had frozen time, but it was clear she wasn't capable of doing that for long. Whatever power she had, it had limits, and those limits were fast approaching. "We need to move," he said, his voice tight with urgency. The girl nodded, her eyes flashing briefly as she glanced back at him. She seemed to have a plan, though she wasn't sharing it with him just yet. Without waiting for him to follow, she darted into the rocks, moving like a shadow, fluid and graceful. John scrambled after her, staying low and trying to keep his breathing steady. They moved quickly, weaving through the jagged stones, but John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The alien ships were near. He could see the faint flicker of their cloaking shields as they hovered just above the horizon. They were already scanning the ground, searching for the girl. For some reason, they hadn't fired yet, but it wouldn't be long. "You can't hide forever," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing her, of letting these ruthless creatures take her back. They wanted her for her powers, and John was beginning to realize just how dangerous that could be for the entire universe. Suddenly, the girl stopped, turning her head slightly. Her eyes widened, and she held up a hand to silence him. John froze. She motioned for him to crouch down, and they both took cover behind a large rock formation. John's heart was hammering in his chest, his mind racing with what was happening next. The girl didn't seem scared, but she did seem aware of something he wasn't. From behind their cover, John peeked out. The alien forces had finally caught up. They weren't alone anymore. Several of their ships had landed, creating a perimeter around the valley. The soldiers were disembarking, armored in silver-black suits with glowing red eyes. Each one carried a long-range plasma rifle, scanning the terrain with precision. "They'll find us soon," John muttered, clutching his weapon tightly. "We need a plan." But the girl didn't seem concerned about a plan. She was staring ahead, her eyes focused on the center of the alien formation. John looked at her, confused, but then he saw it, a strange shimmer in the air. The girl was doing something. Her eyes had turned a brilliant silver, and her hands were moving slightly, as if she were weaving something invisible in the air. Before John could ask her what she was doing, the ground beneath the aliens seemed to ripple, as though the planet itself was reacting to her will. The alien soldiers faltered, glancing around in confusion. The air seemed to warp, shimmering with a strange energy. John's stomach dropped. He realized with sudden clarity. The girl wasn't just stopping time. She was bending reality itself. She was manipulating the very fabric of space, altering their surroundings. The alien soldiers weren't just confused. They were scared. The girl took a slow step forward, her posture shifting. John watched her, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. What was she going to do next? Could she really control the situation, or was she playing with forces too large for her to manage? As if answering his silent question, the girl raised her arms, and the ground beneath the soldiers cracked open. The earth shifted violently, opening up in great fissures beneath their feet. The soldiers scrambled to keep their balance, their weapons falling from their hands as the ground splintered into jagged pieces. The girl's power was no longer subtle. It was raw, untamed, and devastating. But before John could react, a harsh, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Retreat." The alien leader's voice echoed through the valley, filled with authority and desperation. The soldiers began to pull back, quickly regrouping around their ships. John stood frozen, watching the retreating aliens with a mix of awe and disbelief. He had just witnessed the girl unleash a force that was beyond anything he could have imagined. They had won, for now. The girl turned to John, her eyes dimming to their usual glow. She didn't say anything, but her expression told him all he needed to know. This fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. John swallowed hard, feeling a strange weight settle in his chest. They had to keep moving. They couldn't stay here. Not with an army like that hunting them. "Let's go," John said quietly. "We need to find a place to hide." But as they moved away from the battlefield, the girl stopped once more. She glanced back toward the valley, her expression unreadable. Something was coming. Something worse, and John had a feeling that the worst part of their journey was still ahead. The truth revealed. The silence between John and the girl stretched for what felt like hours as they moved deeper into the winding valley. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as though the very planet was awaiting some grand revelation. John had seen the girl's incredible power, but there was still so much about her that he didn't understand. Every step they took only deepened the mystery. She was more than just an alien girl. She was a force. The way she manipulated time, the way the ground had cracked open beneath the alien soldiers, it was beyond human comprehension, and it was becoming clear that her true potential was something far greater than John could ever have imagined. They reached a secluded cave nestled beneath the jagged cliffs, and John quickly led her inside, the heavy footsteps of the alien forces echoing faintly in the distance. He glanced around nervously. He knew they wouldn't have much time before the aliens regrouped. The girl seemed undeterred by their immediate danger, though. She moved deeper into the cave without hesitation. "Are you going to tell me what you are now?" John asked, his voice low but steady. The girl didn't turn to face him. Instead, she continued moving forward, her steps measured, as if she were walking through a familiar, sacred place. The cave was cold, damp, but something about it felt different. Old, almost ancient, as though it had been waiting for them. She finally stopped at the heart of the cave, where a stone altar lay covered in moss and faded markings. John followed her, but he didn't understand. Was this a place of power? Was it some sort of hideout she had chosen? "I can feel them coming," the girl said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter now, tinged with something that sounded almost like sorrow. "They will never stop hunting me. And you can't protect me forever." John was about to speak when the girl raised her hand, silencing him. She turned, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart race. "You must know the truth," she continued. "You've already been part of it from the moment you saved me." He frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean?" The girl's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of sadness in their depths. "I am not just any alien," she said. "I am the last of my kind. My people were once the guardians of time itself, a race of beings that could bend the very fabric of reality. We lived among the stars, shaping the flow of time, ensuring that it remained balanced. But we were hunted, just like I am now." John's breath caught in his throat. Guardians of time. His mind struggled to comprehend the weight of her words. He had known she was powerful, but he hadn't known she was this powerful. "Why are they hunting you? What do they want with you?" The girl paused, as if the question itself was too painful to answer. "My kind created the ability to control time, but not just time. We had the power to reshape entire histories, to protect the future from those who would seek to change it for their own gain." She looked away, her voice trembling for the first time. "But we were betrayed." John's mind was spinning. Betrayed? Who could betray a people like hers? "The ones who hunt me, they are the remnants of a great empire, an empire that sought to control time itself. They believe that with my powers, they can rewrite history, control the universe's destiny. They want to use me as a weapon, to turn the flow of time into their own tool for domination." John's eyes widened as he took in her words. It was like a nightmare unfolding before him, an unimaginable threat from an ancient race bent on rewriting everything. The stakes were higher than he'd ever realized. He hadn't just saved an alien girl. He had unknowingly stepped into a war for the future of the universe itself. "They'll destroy everything to get to you," John said quietly, his voice full of disbelief. The girl nodded. "Yes, they've already destroyed most of my kind. I am the last chance to stop them. If they get me, there will be no future left to protect." John felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let her fall into their hands. "But why didn't you tell me this sooner?" John asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why all the secrecy?" She lowered her gaze for a moment, as if struggling with her own thoughts. "Because I couldn't. I didn't know if you could handle the truth. I didn't know if you would still want to protect me once you knew what I was. Once you realized the cost of doing so." John stepped forward, his face determined. "I don't care who you are, or what you've done. You saved me when I didn't even know it was possible. Now, it's my turn to protect you." The girl looked at him, her eyes softening. She took a step closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The cost of saving me is far greater than you think." Before John could respond, the ground beneath them trembled again. The faint hum of approaching ships vibrating through the cave. The alien forces were getting closer, much closer. "We don't have much time," John said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to move." But the girl wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes were locked on something far beyond him, something John couldn't see. And as she stepped back from him, her expression turned grave. "They're here," she whispered. "And now you'll truly understand what it means to protect me." A power beyond understanding. The cave was suddenly alive with tension. The air felt thick with energy, as if the very stones around them were aware of the impending danger. John could feel it deep in his bones, an overwhelming sense of power, almost as if the girl was drawing from the earth itself. Her expression had shifted. No longer the calm, mysterious figure he had grown used to. She now looked like someone who had accepted a fate she couldn't escape. "What do you mean, I'll understand?" John asked, stepping closer. His voice was a mix of confusion and fear, but the girl didn't answer. Instead, her eyes remained locked on the entrance of the cave, where the faint sound of alien ships could be heard in the distance. The vibrations in the ground were growing stronger, the hum of the engines growing louder, and John realized just how close they were. The girl's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, John saw her true power. It wasn't just her ability to control time or bend the fabric of reality. It was something more raw, more elemental. She wasn't just manipulating the world around her. She was becoming it. "I don't have much time left," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not ready for this, but you need to know the truth. All of it." Before John could speak, she closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, everything in the cave seemed to stop. The very air went still. The soft glow from her skin intensified, her silver hair fluttering as if caught in an unseen wind. She raised her arms, and John felt it, an unexplainable force, like a wave of power washing over him, making his skin tingle. "I am not just the last of my kind," she continued, her voice echoing in John's mind rather than in his ears. "I am the keeper of the timelines, the one who ensures that the balance of the universe remains intact. My people were not just guardians of time, they were its creators." John's heart raced. He had heard stories of ancient beings with unimaginable power, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Guardians of time, creators of timelines. How was that even possible? "The flow of time is not linear," she explained, her eyes glowing brighter now, filled with an ancient wisdom John could barely comprehend. "It is a web, a delicate tapestry, and if one thread is pulled, everything unravels. My people created the threads, ensuring that nothing could disturb the flow. But we were not the only ones who knew of its power." John took a step back, his mind trying to process the enormity of her words. "So those aliens, they want to control time itself. They want to rewrite the future." The girl nodded, her gaze distant. "They believe that by controlling me, they can control the web itself. They want to make sure that their empire rises, to erase the moments that stand in their way. But in doing so, they would destroy everything else, every possibility, every future. There would be no choice left, no freedom." John swallowed hard. This wasn't just a battle to save an innocent girl. This was a fight for the very existence of the future itself. If they lost, there would be no more chances, no more possibilities. History would be written, and it would be an empire of darkness. "And you think you can stop them?" John asked, doubt creeping into his voice. For the first time, the girl's face softened, and she reached out to touch his arm. Her touch was warm, comforting, but there was a sadness in her eyes that John couldn't ignore. "I can stop them, but only with your help." John's mind was reeling. "What do you need me to do? I'm just one guy. I can barely protect myself, let alone protect you from them." "You've already done more than you know," she said with a faint smile. "You saved me. You gave me the chance to show you the truth. And now you must decide. Will you stand with me and fight for the future, or will you let it slip away?" The ground shook again, this time with more force. The alien ships were almost upon them. John could feel the tension in the air. It was like a storm was building. The girl's power had grown, but it wasn't enough to stop them yet. The energy in the cave was palpable, her power humming in the very air around them. "Okay," John said, his voice suddenly steady. "I'll stand with you, whatever it takes." The girl's eyes flashed with something. Pride, hope. It was hard to tell. But before she could say anything else, the entrance to the cave exploded with the sound of enemy fire. Alien soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Their eyes were wild with fury as they spotted the girl. "We're out of time," the girl said quickly, her hand gripping John's arm. "Get ready." John barely had time to raise his weapon before the world around him seemed to shift again. The girl's form blurred for a moment, and then she was standing at the center of the cave, her arms raised high. The air thickened, and the ground beneath their feet cracked open. The cave seemed to ripple, warping around them, as if reality itself was bending. The alien soldiers froze, their bodies suspended in midair, their weapons pointed at nothing, as if time itself had slowed to a halt. John's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he wondered if the girl had done it again, if she had frozen time once more. But no, this wasn't time being frozen. This was something else entirely. The girl was rewriting it. The energy in the cave was not a simple manipulation of time. It was a complete control of reality itself. The fabric of the universe seemed to tremble beneath her power. As the soldiers hovered, trapped in her force, John realized what the girl had meant. She wasn't just stopping time. She was bending it, warping it, using her power to reshape everything around them. This was a power beyond anything he could understand, a power that threatened not only their enemies, but the very world itself. The girl's voice echoed in John's mind, her words calm but filled with purpose. "This is the cost of saving me, John. You will see now how deep this runs. The question is, will you survive what comes next?" And in that moment, John realized the full weight of the battle they were about to face. Time itself was on the line, and the girl's power was their only hope. But at what cost? The ultimate sacrifice. The cave was eerily still as the alien soldiers remained suspended in midair, caught in the girl's overwhelming power. John stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief at the sheer magnitude of what he was witnessing. Time itself had been bent, twisted, and paused, but there was something about the stillness that felt unnaturally wrong. The girl's body was trembling with the force of her control, her glowing eyes dimming and flickering as if her power was starting to drain. She had reached the limits of what she could do. She was holding the soldiers in place, but it was clear she couldn't maintain this for long. "Listen to me, John," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of a burden she could no longer bear. The strain in her tone was unmistakable. "This power, it's too much for me to control. I can only hold them here for a short time." John's heart clenched. He had seen her perform miracles, but this wasn't a victory. This was a countdown. The girl's control was slipping, and with every passing second, it became clear that the cost of holding back these soldiers was more than she could afford. "You've done enough," John said, taking a step toward her. "We can still fight." "We?" "No, John," she interrupted, shaking her head slowly, as though she had already made her decision. Her eyes met his, filled with sorrow and resignation. "I can't fight anymore. I have to stop them, permanently." John's mind reeled. "Stop them? What do you mean?" The girl's voice dropped to a whisper barely audible over the hum of energy filling the cave. I was the one who created the timelines, the one who kept everything balanced. But my people, they knew this would happen. They knew that one day there would be a choice to be made, a choice between saving everything or saving one. John felt his throat tighten. You're talking about sacrificing yourself, aren't you? You can't. I must, she said, her voice full of quiet resolve. This power, it can't exist in this form. It was never meant for one being. It was always meant to be shared. If I don't stop it, the universe itself will tear apart. You've seen the threads. The web of time. If I don't break the cycle, it will destroy everything. Everyone. Including you. John's mind raced. He couldn't imagine the kind of decision she was making. How could he let her sacrifice herself? How could he stand by and watch someone who had already saved him give up everything for a cause that seemed so impossible? There's always another way, John said, shaking his head. There's got to be. We can find it. We don't need to do this. The girl's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch his cheek. Her touch was gentle, but there was a finality to it. There is no other way, John. Not anymore. Before John could protest, she turned toward the suspended soldiers, her body tense, her eyes glowing brighter than before. With a soft, almost imperceptible gesture, she released her hold on them, allowing the aliens to fall back to the ground. They were stunned, but they weren't defeated. They rose quickly, preparing their weapons. You have to leave, John, she said, her voice steady. You can't stay here. I need you to survive. You need to protect the future, even if it means leaving me behind. John's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, desperation, and disbelief. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't. I'm not leaving you, he said fiercely, stepping closer, reaching for her hand. You've already saved me once. I'm not going to let you make this sacrifice alone. The girl smiled faintly, but the sadness in her eyes was overwhelming. You don't have a choice. I'm sorry. In a single motion, she extended both arms, and the energy around her intensified, spiraling into a brilliant, almost blinding light. The alien soldiers charged forward, but before they could react, the girl unleashed a surge of raw power that sent them flying back. They were thrown against the cave walls, their bodies slamming into the stone with terrifying force. But it wasn't just the soldiers she was attacking. It was time itself. John's eyes widened in horror as the girl's body began to flicker, her form wavering like a fading star. She wasn't just altering the present anymore. She was rewriting the very fabric of their existence, pushing the timeline to the breaking point. The energy around her crackled with raw power, and the ground beneath them began to quake. I'm sorry, John, she whispered one last time, her voice barely audible over the roaring energy. And then, with a final, blinding burst of light, everything went silent. John collapsed to his knees, the world around him spinning. The cave was quiet. Too quiet. He couldn't feel her presence anymore. The girl, the one who had shown him the unimaginable, who had saved him more times than he could count, she was gone. His heart ached, a deep, gnawing pain filling his chest. But as he looked around, he realized something. The alien soldiers were unconscious, their weapons scattered around them. The air felt different, lighter. The oppressive weight that had been hanging over them was gone. She had done it. She had saved them. But at what cost? John stood, shakily wiping the tears that had gathered in his eyes. He didn't have the answers. He didn't even know what the future would look like now. But he knew one thing. He had to honor her sacrifice. With a heavy heart, John turned away from the still bodies of the alien soldiers and the place where the girl had disappeared. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew it was his turn to protect it. And he would fight with every ounce of strength he had, to ensure that her legacy lived on. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The unexpected return. John stood at the mouth of the cave, staring out at the landscape that had become strangely serene after the girl's sacrifice. The alien soldiers were gone, their bodies motionless, the hum of their ships no longer filling the air. Time had shifted, the threads of the universe adjusted, but the weight of her absence hung heavy in the air. She was gone, and the cost of saving the future was a price he couldn't yet fathom. But as he turned to leave the cave, something in the air seemed to change. It was subtle at first, like a breeze that wasn't there. Then, the very ground beneath his boots shifted, causing him to pause, his heart pounding in his chest. Someone, was nearby. Impossible, John whispered under his breath. He couldn't explain it, but deep down, he felt her. Her presence, it was still there, faint but undeniable. His mind raced. Had he missed something? Had she truly vanished? Or was there something more to her sacrifice than he understood? Suddenly, the air shimmered, like heat rising off pavement, distorting the space around him. The wind swirled, picking up dust, and for a brief moment, John thought he saw the faintest outline, a figure, half-formed, flickering in and out of existence. Is it you? John called out, his voice a mix of hope and confusion. The figure grew clearer, and John's breath caught in his throat. There, standing in the entrance to the cave, was the girl, but she wasn't the same. Her form was more ethereal, like she was made of light and shadows intertwined, barely holding together. She looked at him, and though she was different, there was no mistaking the recognition in her eyes. "I thought you were gone," John whispered, stepping forward in disbelief. "I thought you. You thought I was gone," she repeated softly, her voice a gentle echo. "But I am here, in a way." John's mind swirled with confusion, his heart still heavy with grief from moments before. "But you sacrificed yourself. You rewrote the timeline to save everything." "I did," she replied, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. "But there is a price, John, a price that cannot be seen, not by mortal eyes." Her eyes, now shimmering with a radiant glow, met his with a mixture of sadness and strength. "I rewrote the threads of reality so that the future could survive. But in doing so, I became part of it. My essence, my power, it is no longer bound to one form. I am everywhere." John felt a cold chill run through him. He hadn't fully understood the girl's true power until now, until he saw her, not as the alien he had tried to protect, but as something greater, something more than human comprehension. She wasn't just manipulating time anymore. She was woven into it. "You're part of the future now?" John asked, his voice trembling. The girl nodded, her figure becoming less solid with each passing second. "Yes, I have become the weaver of timelines, the guardian of all that has been and all that will be. I gave my life, my essence, to ensure the survival of what you know. But in return, I no longer exist as you knew me. I am part of the fabric of existence itself." John's chest tightened, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The girl had never been just a victim of fate. She had been the fate of the universe, woven into the threads of time. Her sacrifice hadn't just saved one future, it had altered everything. She had become something timeless. "I can still feel you," John said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can feel you in everything. In the air, in the world. You're everywhere, aren't you?" "I am," she said, her voice now a calm whisper that echoed in his mind. "I exist in the smallest grain of sand, in the whisper of the wind, in every choice made by every living being. I am the future and the past, all at once. And I will never leave you. Not truly." John looked at her, unsure whether he was seeing an illusion or something real. The girl, or whatever she had become, was slipping through his fingers like mist. Her form was no longer solid, no longer the alien girl he had known. She was something larger, something incomprehensible. "I don't know what to do now," John said, his voice breaking. "You've changed everything, and you will carry on. she said gently, her smile filled with a quiet understanding. You, John, will carry the future. It is your time now. You will be the protector of what remains, the one who ensures that the balance holds. You were always meant to be part of this, just as I was always meant to be part of you. John's heart swelled with a strange sense of peace and loss all at once. He had never imagined that his journey would lead him here, that he would be the one to carry on her legacy. But the truth was undeniable. He was the last human who could carry the weight of what had happened, of what she had done. Will I see you again? He asked quietly, his voice full of longing. Her form flickered one last time, her glowing eyes meeting his for a final fleeting moment. I will always be with you, John, not as you knew me, but as part of everything, as part of everyone. Every time you make a choice, every time you fight for the future, I will be there. We will be there. With that, she faded completely, leaving John standing alone at the mouth of the cave. But the weight of her words remained, hanging in the air. She wasn't gone. She couldn't be. John stood there, staring into the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to rise. The future was uncertain, and his role in it was unclear. But one thing was certain, he wasn't alone. Not anymore. The battle was over, but the war for the future was just beginning. And John would carry on for her, and for every possible future that had yet to be written.